These are just some examples I picked, but you could pick many more, and what the aim is ultimately is for you to pick them out of your own writing once you've written. And when you go back through a composition, don't try to revise everything at once. Just try word choice. In one revision, just try, I'm now going to try word choice. That's all in revising. You'll be amazed how relatively quickly it can go. You see, if you've written 500 words and you have 25 words that you're going to make a choice with, you can probably make a choice in each one in 30 seconds. Come up with something better. It's a challenge. It's a kind of game. If you like to play puzzles or something, if you like to do crosswords or whatever it is, it's a kind of word game. And you can have a help with a dictionary or a thesaurus or anything else that comes to hand as a reference tool. It does make a difference. Now, I ask you to read a couple things in the Elements of Rhetoric on perspicuity. This is a word we often don't use now. It's a perspicacious person. It's perspicuity. And it simply means clarity. Be clear. But almost everyone who's written on rhetoric and oratory has stressed this. And they have made a special point of doing so, because it's entirely possible to write something that you understand which someone else does not perfectly understand. There was a famous case of the Spanish writer, I think it was Lope de Vega, who wrote a sonnet. He wrote a lot of plays too. And some years later, someone asked him what that sonnet meant. And he said, when I wrote it, I and God knew what it meant. And now only God knows. Meaning he had forgotten his train of thought and his associations in the ensuing years, and he really had trouble putting the pieces back together. Have you ever read poetry that you don't understand at all? Yes. Now, maybe after you read it more and more and more, it will soak in and you'll get some understanding out of it. Have you ever read prose you don't understand? I would imagine so, too. What does that mean? Especially with long, often bureaucratic language that deals heavily in abstractions. And you come away shaking your head. Now, I'm not asking you to dumb down things. That's another matter. I'm talking about clarity, not being at a lower level of vocabulary or intelligence. There's a difference. Clarity. It's extremely important. So here's what some of these older rhetoricians said, these rhetoricians who cared very much about it. This is Campbell in his Philosophy of Rhetoric. He says, of all the qualities mentioned above, the first and most essential is clarity. Whatever be the ultimate intention of the orator, to inform, to convince, to please, to move, to persuade, still the orator must speak so as to be understood or speaks to no purpose. Every sentence ought to be perspicuous. That is to say, every sentence on its own ought to be able to be understood on its own. You ever write something and then someone might criticize it and then you say, well, yeah, but a few sentences on I explain that, or no. If your reader is puzzling over what your reader has just read, don't expect your reader to be happy to find the explanation in the next paragraph. Every composition is a chain of sentences, each of which needs to be clear with respect to the previous sentences. And it needs to lead to the next sentence, not to be explained retroactively by future sentences. Maybe elaborated on a little, maybe ramifications drawn out, but not the essential meaning to be later explained. Then Campbell says something very interesting. If language were capable of absolute perfection, which it evidently is not, if words and things could be rendered exact counterparts to each other, if every different thing in nature had a different symbol by which it was expressed, and every difference in the relation of things had a corresponding difference in the combination of words, purity alone would secure perspicuity. In other words, if you just picked the right words, everything would be okay. But Campbell's point is, language is a very slippery affair. It has all different kinds of connotations. It's imperfect. It doesn't represent things directly. It represents your reflection of what that thing is or what that relation is. And your reflection is not perfectly identical with someone else's reflection. In Gulliver's Travels, an 18th century satire, Jonathan Swift satirizes this by saying there is an academy, he says, which has decided that words are things. They just have that solid existence. It's a thing, and believe it or not, there were theorists of language who said that. So, says Swift, why not just then eliminate words and communicate only by things? So he invents a series of philosophers who walk around with very large backpacks filled with things. And when they wish to communicate to one another, they remove a thing from the backpack and hand it over. Now, we all know that this is not entirely specious, because we often do communicate by things, or signs, or symbols. But the point is that those signs or symbols or words are not the thing itself. As a footnote, this has generally led to two quite distinct attitudes to language in theory, which if you haven't run across already, you almost certainly will in your studies of language. One attitude is that since language is imperfect, what we need to do is really nail it down, fix it, make it as perfect as we can. Make sure that every dictionary definition is reviewed by a national academy, as in France or as in Italy. Make sure that the language is as purified as it can be. Put it through a committee. Oh, and by the way, don't allow too many foreign words to come in either, because they are foreign words and foreign phrases, and they will disrupt the purity of the system of the language itself. And that has indeed been one strategy about language. Second strategy would be, well, language is quite imperfect, so play with it. Go ahead. You can be ambiguous. You can use puns. You can play word games. You can have fun with language. Now, this usually doesn't work out too well when you're dealing with public affairs, I admit, or business, but it works out quite well in literature. It works out quite well in certain dramatic situations, and it works out quite well in some forms of poetry. So the medium of language itself becomes part of the subject of what is being written. We cannot communicate perfectly, so let us explore all the possibilities of that imperfection by writing about it. But when dealing with non-fictional matters, in which you're trying to persuade or elucidate, I would suggest that the idea of that open play is only acceptable if your audience realizes that you are doing it and can in fact follow you. If you become too self-indulgent in it, you will lose them. So Campbell says a person may, in respect of grammatical purity, speak unexceptionably and yet speak obscurely or ambiguously, and at the same time even unintelligibly. And that's true. It is possible to pick up prose at times and not be able to decide what it has actually said. It's one of the reasons why almost all laws are interpreted as well, because there can be different interpretations, even in legal writing. And here is what is said by Adams about perspicuity. For every species of written composition, it is doubtless a virtue of the highest order, but of public speaking, it is the vital spark. In other words, You cannot get away with laxity in clarity in speaking the way that you can in writing. Why not? Why is it more important in speaking? Why is it the vital spark in speaking? Connor? This is a point that Adams makes. Why is it more important in speaking?
Because like when you were saying before, if a sentence is explained a few sentences later, if someone's reading, then they can go back and look at it. But when someone's listening to a speech, they don't have that amount of time. They have to take things in as they're being said.
That's right. If you're reading something, you can say, time out. I have to go back a few sentences. Or time out, I've got to go forward a few sentences. Or I have to suspend my interpretation if you're reading. If you are listening, you can't do that. Or else you'll lose the next sentence. If you take a time out, you've lost something. Maybe you've gained something too, but you've lost something else. You have to keep up with the pace of the speaker. If you don't, you will lose something inevitably. Now, maybe what you lose won't be important, but maybe it'll be really important. Have you ever been listening to something with a friend and got distracted and then turned to a friend and said, "What was that he or she said?" And was the friend able to answer briskly, correctly, accurately? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. Listening is hard, and we need to help people listen. That brings up a point about our discussion last time about democracy and deliberation, which is writing, speaking, they're terribly important to be clear. Listening is hard. Listening takes effort, actually takes energy to listen. You really have to connect the ear with the mind, and you have to keep paying attention. That's very hard to do. It's very hard to do. The average human attention span doesn't go longer than about 20 minutes without failing. I know this class is 75 minutes. And it's hard for me to keep attention on it sometime. I'm sure it's hard for you. It's only human nature. It's just a fact. Ezra Pound once said that France gained the intellectual superiority of Europe when it shortened the lecture hour to 40 minutes. So you have to deal with the fact that the human mind tends to wander. It's a good thing in it, perhaps. But that means if you're listening to something that is difficult, you really need to concentrate on it. Did anyone here listen to President Bakau's inaugural address? Do you remember one of the things he said about listening, Braden? Do you remember it all, or Noura? It doesn't mean you weren't listening. Noura?
Are you talking about what the president himself said, or?
No, about what he said about listening.
Oh, I mean, I heard the governor of Massachusetts give the whole speech about importance of listening. And
yes, that's true too.
Yeah, and I heard that.
Yes.
And he said it's more important than just yelling your opinion.
Yes.
Or just speaking.
That was Charlie Baker, an alumnus of the Harvard Department of English, who said, yes, you need to listen. You're sitting around the table, you need to listen. It's terribly important. President Bakau has said this himself on numerous occasions, I think also in his inaugural address. Listening's very hard, but as a writer and as a speaker, you cannot count on everyone in your audience hanging on every word and listening intently minute after minute after minute after minute. That's an ideal audience. No such thing as an ideal audience exists in reality. So, echoing Campbell to some degree, Adams says, the communication of ideas in a continued discourse must always be imperfect. It's not ever going to be perfect. But of that which is written, the reader may take his own time to search out the meaning. He can review, compare, combine, but oratory considered as such, as independent of the pen and the press, has no such resources. Apply these principles by analogy to the public discourse. The object itself is the idea in the speaker's mind, in your mind, The light is the words and sentences by means of which the speaker attempts its transmission, and the unobstructed space is the absence of every other object or idea, which by intervention might intercept the communication of thought. Let me give you another example, which is sometimes used in drama classes. Could you put your pen down? Could you catch this? Good. Did you have to pay attention? Right. Speaking is like throwing something to someone. You need to make sure that every once in a while you look at them. They need to be prepared to catch it. And you can't go like that, good catch, or you'll be very lucky if it's caught. Thank you. You disproved my point, almost. So, it is a physical act. That's another way to put it. Speaking is a physical act. You are literally throwing your voice to someone. Those words are going out into someone's ear. The ear is catching them. The eye is catching them. Now, to use the analogy of a ball or a cup may seem trivial, but it's the kind of attention that is required. You've got to attend to it. And it isn't just the audience's job to attend. You have got to attend. You've got to fix your attention in that kind of way. And you've got to try to make the best throw you can. The best throw. Because if you make a throwing error, that's it. You can't redo it. It's done. You can't go back and replay it. It's happened. Now, I want to say just a couple words about how Harvard destroyed rhetoric. I ask you to read this. Harvard and some other schools did, in a way, help destroy rhetoric as a subject, and they started to do it in the late 19th, early 20th century. One of the reasons they did it is they thought newspapers were going to take over everything. Everything would be read. It wouldn't be as necessary any longer for people to get up in public and speak to groups of people. It would all be transmitted by the telegraph. It would all be printed. Mass communication would be almost entirely through newspapers and maybe books. A huge number of new newspapers published in the United States at that time. Almost every city had 2, 3, 4, 5 newspapers. Every city had a morning. Every city had an afternoon paper. Everybody read them. How many people here today read newspapers regularly? Paper newspapers. Right. Online newspapers, as it were. Yeah, some, quite a few. But when you got one at your door twice a day, 7 days a week, and many families subscribed to both newspapers, that was considered it. Then there was something else about the study of rhetoric and oratory. It was considered low or mean. Yes, that's true. Places like Harvard, Brown, and the Ivy League schools thought that they didn't need to teach rhetoric and composition and oratory anymore because it was a lower form of the study of language. It was somehow less important. And what was more important was to study literary theory and to study the aesthetic side of the use of language. So many departments of English and of literature began to teach more exclusively poetry, drama, and prose fiction.